We have looked at several possible ways in which markets determine price and at the factors which shift demand and shift supply. It's now time to apply these ideas to real-world markets to answer the question, what are the market effects of a change in supply or demand? That is, how do price and quantity change when there is a change in supply or demand? Let's turn to an example now. The headline from the story in the Wall Street Journal reads, "Apartment demand hits 5-year high." Our question again is, what is the impact on the market? How does price and quantity change? To address this, to use our model of supply and demand, we follow a 3-step process. The most difficult of these is the very first one, and that's to identify the specific market that we're interested in looking at. Secondly, once we've done that, we want to ask, is this a change in supply or is this a change in demand? Is this an increase or a decrease in supply or demand? The final step is to illustrate the impact. We draw the change in supply or demand and show the resulting change in equilibrium, price, and quantity. So let's apply these 3 steps. First, to identify the specific market, we see in the first sentence of the article that it's referring to the demand for rental apartments. So apartment rentals is the market that we are interested in looking at. Clearly, it's a change in demand that we're looking at as well, apartment demand, and it hits a 5-year high. So that means compared to several years ago, we have demand which has increased. Now it is time for us to illustrate what has happened given this increase in demand. To illustrate the effect of increasing demand, we start with our usual framework for supply and demand. We're going to begin with our axes, price and quantity. We can write down that our quantity axis is for the number of rental units that are available. Our price is the dollar per rental unit. And we can begin now with the original demand before it has changed. And we can show the supply curve. The original demand and the supply curve mean that there is an original price and quantity, assuming that this is a competitive market. Price set at the intersection of supply and the original demand curve. Now we have an increase in demand, shifting the demand curve to the right. This increase in demand leads to a new equilibrium price and quantity, which we can now go ahead and label price 1 and quantity 1 at the new demand curve. The result of this is that we have an increase in price and an increase in the number of apartment rentals. Note that for this kind of problem, we typically assume a competitive market. This is not because it is necessarily the most realistic, but because the question that we're really interested in, what happens to price and quantity as we have a change in supply or demand, is easily answered using this framework, and we get no added information really from assuming either market power on the buyer or the seller's side. So typically using supply and demand to address questions about changes in price and quantity, when we have a change in demand or supply, we use this competitive market model, and it gets us directly to what has happened to the change in price and the change in quantity. So in this case, what we can very clearly say is that this increase in apartment demand leads to higher prices to rent an apartment. And depending where we are on the supply curve, we may see either a small or a larger change in the number of rentals that are made available.